Hello and welcome to Backyard Catch. This is Nick Roby. Thanks so much for joining me. What an exciting weekend of college football. I know it's been a couple weeks, but I'm excited to be back and ready to dive on in for just breaking down some fun action over the college football slate. We had our playoff rankings that were recently released last week, and they moved Ohio State up to number one instead of Georgia or Michigan, going based off of resume for them. And then Georgia and Michigan haven't super been tested yet. Georgia maybe a little bit more than Michigan, and of course, Michigan's got the whole scandal that's going on with sign stealing, and we haven't come up with a fancy name yet. Sign gate, sign stealing gate, something. They've let go of Connor Stallions, so something to monitor. And it was interesting to see like maybe what the committee would do with Michigan, but and I don't really blame them, saying that's not really our responsibility, but just was interested to see like if they would even just punish them a little bit. But so we'll see if it takes any effect or as more information keeps coming out into the future. But there was a lot of fun football that was played this past Saturday, and let's talk about that. Man, I mean, where do we start? I think you can start with number one, Ohio State. They went on the road to Rutgers, and I know Rutgers is ready for the divisions to go away because they get the fun Big Ten East. But Ohio State goes on the road, and they were struggling a little bit on offense. They were losing in that first half, and Rutgers pulls off the fake QB sneak, which I thought was cool. It goes underneath the guy's legs and gets a big play. Ohio State then does come back with a pick six, and they kind of take off from there. So a little bit of a sluggish kind of a game at first, but Ohio State does end up coming away in that one 35-16. So it's good for Ohio State to escape. They've already passed the Penn State game, and now they're just looking forward towards Michigan, obviously. And so that will be a big one, especially with all the sign stealing stuff coming up from that. From the noon slate as well, you had Texas outlasting Kansas State. This one was crazy. Texas was up with backup quarterback Malik Murphy, freshman. They're up like I think 27-7, something big. And K-State, who has been a dark horse team. I had picked K-State to play Texas. Actually, I picked this matchup in the preseason for the Big 12 title, and that race is just all over the place. I mean, it's kind of hard to know right now, but Texas comes away with a 33-30 win, even though they let up 20 unanswered points. K-State comes back with the tying to try to tie the game. They tie the game, and then they try to take the extra point. They miss it, and then they trade field goals. It's 30-30. Texas goes in overtime at home, gets the field goal. K-State, it's 4th and 3, like 4th and goal from the 3. Or I'm sorry, it's 4th and goal. It's 4th and 3 from like the 8. It wasn't from the goal, around there. Instead of going for the field goal, they go for the end zone. You're on the road, you take more chances wanting to end it on your own accord. It's tough because if you make the field goal, then you get an opportunity. And then after that, you have to go for 2. And then like in the second overtime, you have to go for 2. And then after that, you have to trade back 2-point conversion tries, which I don't personally like that, but that's the way the new rule is. So I don't hate the decision, but it's a big decision, because if it works, man. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to own that. So K-State comes away with that, but they gave Texas all they could handle in the second half, and Texas comes away with it. And now Texas is still the only one-loss team in the Big 12, from what I remember, in a crazy to see who's going to play second in that. But that was big for Texas as they come down the wire. Mississippi holds on against Texas A&M. Ole Miss was up. A&M comes back. A&M goes ahead, then Ole Miss scores with a minute and a half to go, and then A&M has a chance to tie it with like a 40-something yard field goal. They push it wide right. Mississippi holds on, and now the Fighting Lane Kiffins are traveling next week to Athens, so they face Georgia, which for a top 10 matchup, which is going to be pretty interesting, especially for both races. To see, this might even be a preview of the SEC championship. You don't know. Very interesting to see. But Ole Miss just keeps plugging along, and they're just quietly just kind of hanging in there. And now we got a top 10 matchup. And if they get the win at Georgia, I mean, yeah, who knows after that? And then you've got Notre Dame, 15 Notre Dame comes to Clemson. Clemson having just lost to Notre Dame, or NC State, I mean, and then Notre Dame coming in at 7-2. And you got the whole, if you've been listening on national radio, obviously I'm wearing a Clemson shirt. As that's the school, like that's the school I graduated from. But hearing about, I mean, Tabo's radio show, Tiger Calls, is making national headlines, which take that for what you will. I think a lot of it was used out of context, but Tyler from Spartanburg, man, everyone's got an opinion about it. And I don't know, you got injuries, and Clemson comes out and they hit out the gate running. They get the long touchdown. They get multiple scores. They get a pick six. Notre Dame has just been on their heels. They bounce back a little bit in the second half, but Clemson is the one who actually capitalizes on turnovers, and they get the 31-23 win at home to improve to 5-4. Massive win. Dabo becomes the all-time winningest coach in Clemson football history. So it's kind of crazy, after all that, to get against Notre Dame, which I thought was pretty big. Notre Dame falls to 7-3. Interesting to kind of see where they are. But Clemson, trying to use this momentum to really finish off the season well. But man, college football, it's hard to predict of what this is all going to look like. Tennessee and Utah both take care of business in the top 25. Army gets the win on the road at Air Force. They win 23-3. I thought that was very interesting. Army with the option run, hold down Air Force. Georgia and Missouri. This one was interesting. I picked Missouri to cover because the line was 16. Was it 16 and a half? Or I think it was just 16 is what I was playing at. But I was like, Georgia, Georgia's good, but I just wasn't sure, without Brock Bowers and with Carson back the load on his shoulders, and Missouri can score, and they can generally hold on to the ball. And last year, this was the 19-17 game, where Georgia barely escapes, and people kind of forget about it. But Georgia holds on to win. They were up, and then they get a late turnover to really seal the deal. But this game is close throughout, and it's interesting. I think Georgia has some weaknesses that if a team is able to capitalize, especially turnovers, and especially Georgia on the road too. I think they are vulnerable. There isn't to me, there's not a clear number one. This is the obvious choice this year, which just makes it so much more interesting. But Georgia definitely has their flaws as well. But they keep fighting hard, and they keep playing, and then they keep winning. So I mean, they're tough to beat. They're a reason they've won the past two national titles. Florida State was on the road at Pitt, and just kind of a sloppy game for them. Johnny Wilson was out, I believe, and they just couldn't get the ball going. They fumble it. They finally tie it late in the first half at 7. They end up winning 24-7, but not pretty for Florida State. But that's just a survive and advance game for them. They punched their ticket to Charlotte. Remember, in the ACC, there aren't any divisions this year. So it's just top two teams. So Florida State undefeated. They will be playing the ACC championship game. So big for them. Congrats to them on that victory, as well as they're trying to settle up the regular season and hoping for a chance at the ACC title and a shot at the playoff. You've got the last Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, the last ever scheduled Bedlam game in Stillwater, which is kind of crazy to think about. You have this big rivalry game, but because of Oklahoma and Texas moving to the SEC, and with all the scheduling stuff, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State have obviously been a conference game, and you kind of see that with conference realignment. And honestly, I don't blame Oklahoma State. You're like you guys left. We're supposed to bend over backwards to make this work. I don't know. It's unfortunate. I hope for the game, for the sport of college football, this comes back. But it's hard to blame Oklahoma State too, because Oklahoma and Texas are the one leaving, and there's only so many games. I still think this should be played personally, but Oklahoma State's they've made it pretty clear, and I can understand where they're coming from. But this was a back and forth game, man. And Gordon, their talented sophomore running back, he looks like he goes down, he comes back. and they come back and win it. They win it 27-24 in just a classic Bedlam game. They rush the field. I mean, this, it means a lot to Oklahoma State because it's the last Bedlam game. It's in Stillwater. It's at home. They get bragging rights for the foreseeable future over Oklahoma. Oklahoma goes to the SEC, but you could just tell how much this meant to Oklahoma State. And it makes the Big 12 title race just very interesting because also with them, it's just the top two teams. So it feels like Texas is going to go, but like who is going to be the other team? Who's going to be the other team to go? It's hard to know right now. Penn State takes care of business on the road at Maryland. I thought this could be a letdown spot, and I wasn't sure how strong the Penn State offense would be, especially with what you were seeing against Ohio State, and just knowing that Maryland can score. I wasn't saying that it was like Maryland was going to stop them, but I just thought Maryland could keep this close, and I was wrong on that. Maryland, Penn State just really put it on, especially in the second half, really put it on them, and they win 51-15. So James Franklin and these guys, they lost to Ohio State, but they're not out of it. And if they beat Michigan and Michigan loses to Ohio State, it makes things interesting in the East for sure. Louisville takes care of business at home against Virginia Tech. Louisville's just one of those teams. They are a different animal at home. Like in Louisville, they are tough to play and they're more susceptible on the road. And Virginia Tech, same. They look better at home, of course, but this is a classic, like, who's the home team? Okay, that's who I think is going to win. But Louisville's quietly putting together a really good season. They've got a very favorable schedule as well. And they've got a strong chance as anybody being that second team to come and play in the ACC title. So be very interested to see, but they've got a favorable schedule for themselves. Tulane escapes at ECU 13-10. Oregon takes care of business against Cal 63-19, keeping pace in the Pac-12. Even though they lost at Harper or Washington, they keep pace there. Kansas wins a close one, 28-21 over Iowa State, keeping them alive in the Big 12. Michigan and Purdue, there's a lot of animosity in this game just because of all the sign stealing stuff, and Michigan takes care of business, but wasn't sure how distracted they would be after a bye week and everything. But they come out and win 41-13. And then we get to the night games, which I thought were very interesting. We're going to start off with Washington and USC. You got the battle of Heisman candidates. You've got Caleb Williams, last year's Heisman winner, Michael Penix Jr., who is a front runner right now with a chance to win the Heisman or trying to make his case for it. And USC trying to keep their Pac-12 hopes alive, and Washington trying to stay unblemished and get their shot, for a Pac-12 title and a shot at the playoff. And this one was back and forth, man. And I'm kind of just mixed when I think of USC and honestly with these Lincoln Riley teams, because they're so good on offense, but they just haven't put the emphasis, I would think, into defense. And it's like they score 42, which is great. You're going to be a lot of teams that way, but this Washington team, they're a very powerful offense, and they can go toe to toe with you. And if you don't get stops, it doesn't matter. And they end up losing 52-42. One turnover, you don't score, and you win a shootout, and it's tough. I mean, with these bigger teams, like these bigger name brand teams, that's tough to do. And USC's gonna have to circle back and really, decide how much more emphasis they're going to want to put on defense, especially stopping the run too. I think they need to be, even if you're giving up some points, like you have to be able to get off on third down and get those stops to beat these higher teams. And Washington was really good in this game. Their running back, he was Dylan Johnson. If I have that right, let me see, he was 26 for 256 and 4 touchdowns. It's crazy. I mean, Phil Maffa for Clemson was 36 for 186 and 2 touchdowns, but he had 26 carries, 254 yards and 4 touchdowns. Or 56. That was crazy. Penix and him had exactly the same amount of yardage. Very balanced attack. Caleb Williams played well, 27-35, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns. But they just couldn't match it up late. And so now USC is going to go back to the drawing board and see how much they can, but they can't take any breaths. They've got a tough regular season. And Washington, they're unblemished, and now they've got an interesting stretch too for them. As I look for their schedule, they've got Utah next week, but Utah, that's on the road. 3:30 game on Fox against 7-2 Utah, but they're still playing their backup quarterback. Then they go on the road to Oregon State. That one is very interesting and underrated. And then they host Washington State in the Apple Cup. So Washington could still lose one of those, and but still be, one of the top teams in the Pac-12. This team, the Pac-12 race is just so crazy, and I think for their own sake in this last year, as their last hurrah, you kind of almost hope that they don't cannibalize one another and give themselves a shot to have a team represent them in the playoff down the road. But that's a conversation for later. It's just interesting as we're getting down these final games. And we had LSU and Alabama. This one was a really fun one to watch. You had two very dynamic quarterbacks, especially with their legs, with Jalen Milroe for Alabama and Jayden Daniels for LSU. This was a very back and forth tie ball game at the half. And honestly, this one took a big change once Jayden Daniels took that hit to the head. Ended up being roughing the passer, but he went out for the rest of the game, and they had to go to Garrett Nussmeier after that, and they just couldn't come back. Alabama was starting to click on offense, and just a bummer because, Jayden Daniels was playing very well. He had 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, he had 163 yards on the ground, 1 touchdown, and this dude was electric, man. I mean, it's clearly why he is a top contender on the Heisman race, because the dude is just so hard to stop. You get everything covered so well, and then he can just scramble, and he just goes 20 yards. The next thing you think you cover it well, and he's going. And Jalen Milroe does the same thing. He goes 20 for 155 yards and 4 touchdowns himself. He throws for 219 yards. They both throw for the same amount of yardage, which that's funny to me. But he played really well, I thought, and LSU really tried to cover them deep. And same thing, he just took a lot of chances running, and they just had a hard time stopping him. And this was a fun game to watch, and it was a bummer when he went out for injury, just because it definitely changed the dynamic. And so hopefully he's okay. It seems like he's in concussion protocol, so hopefully we'll get a word more this week for them. But I was a little surprised that wasn't reviewed for targeting, just because I'm not saying it necessarily was targeting, because it wasn't the clear hit of where you see the straight collision, but because he hits him in the head and then he drives him back, I was kind of expecting just at least a review because of how that's called usually. But they don't do that. It is roughing the passer. I still think that should have been reviewed based on how they call other things. I've watched a lot of football over the past years, and it's still hard to know what exactly targeting is. Depends on the game and the interpretation of the rules. But it's one of those things where it's I could see either way. In targeting, I was surprised it wasn't reviewed for targeting at all with that. So Alabama, they take that loss to Texas, but you look up and they only have 1 loss, man. And then they themselves have an interesting stretch as we go down. They've got Kentucky on the road, that's a tough place to play. And they got Chattanooga, and then they got the Iron Bowl, which that's on the road as well. So 2 tough road games where they'll be favored, but it's still tough to know, if they don't lose another one of those. And that's where other ones are trying to keep their eye on that. And then lastly, you have Oregon State goes on the road and beats Colorado in a close one. Oregon State is quietly having a good year as well. And that's where DJ Uiagalelei, the former Clemson quarterback, he transfers to Oregon State. They're 7-2, but they've notched, now some good wins, and they've got an interesting schedule. They host Stanford, which should be a win for them, and then they host Washington, and they go on the road to Oregon. So Oregon State could have a lot to say in this Pac-12 race for themselves and for others trying to make that push. So they're definitely a team to watch. As one might say, an impact team, or it could change a lot of the course of what's to happen. And then Arizona beats UCLA at home 27-10. So that's a little wrap up as well. We'll get more the playoff rankings will come out on Tuesday night, and interesting to see if any big changes. I don't expect so. I would expect Ohio State to stay number one. You made the case, and I'd be interested to see in response to this, like who you think should be number one, really, and not just like based on who feels like the number one team, and then what resume feels like the number one resume right now. I'd be curious to see that kind of a conversation. But there's a wrap up with that. We've got college basketball. I'm recording this on Sunday evening. Monday we have the start of college basketball, so super excited for that. A lot of teams start their season this week. Excited to talk more about that as that comes around the corner. But thanks so much for listening. Remember to like and subscribe and review on YouTube Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Go there, like the video. That would be big for me. Subscribe just so more people can see it. Make sure you get all those notifications. So thanks so much for listening, guys. And for now, we are signing off.